Okay, so Queen Camilla and her family just got caught in literally one of the messiest royal scandals I've seen in a while. And it involves a stolen brooch, an illegal cover-up attempt, and Prince William basically saying no to the Queen consort in front of the entire...
In June 2026, Catherine, Princess of Wales, walked into an official state engagement wearing a brooch. She did not explain it. Kensington Palace issued no statement. No one pointed to it or drew attention to it in any official capacity. She simply wore it, pinned to her ceremonial attire in front of crowds and international dignitaries, as though it were the most natural choice in the world. It was not a casual choice. That brooch had spent the previous several months in the private home of a woman with no royal title, no official role, and no legal right to have it. And the story of how it got there, and how it was brought back, reveals something important about who is actually running the British monarchy right now. The gift that belonged to the crown. To understand what happened, you need to understand what the Sapphire Jubilee Snowflake brooch actually is. In 2017, the Governor General of Canada presented it to Queen Elizabeth II to mark her 65 years on the throne. It was not a personal gift in any ordinary sense. It was commissioned specifically for the occasion. Rare beluga sapphires from Baffin Island, set with diamonds, crafted to honor a reign and given on behalf of a nation. State gifts of this kind are not personal property. They do not belong to the recipient the way a birthday present belongs to someone. Under the legal framework that governs the British monarchy, a diplomatic gift of this significance belongs to the Crown, to the Royal Collection Trust, to be preserved, catalogued, and passed down through the institution. The sovereign cannot give it away to a family member because they feel like it. It is not theirs to give. Queen Elizabeth understood this perfectly. The brooch was documented, received, and held within the collection as intended. Then Elizabeth died in September 2022, and the administrative transition that followed was any honest account enormous, tens of thousands of artifacts across multiple royal residences being catalogued, moved, and reorganized simultaneously. The operational pressure on the palace staff was significant, and somewhere in that pressure, a gap opened. The private citizen with a state treasure. Camilla's sister is not a senior royal. She holds no title. She has no constitutional role. She is, in the formal sense, a private citizen. Sources say she used the chaos of the post-Elizabeth transition, specifically an operational gap in how the collection was being tracked during the inventory reorganization, to gain access to the vault where the Sapphire Jubilee brooch was being held. She removed it, a national diplomatic treasure, commissioned by a Commonwealth government, presented to a sovereign to honor 65 years of reign, taken from a restricted archive and brought into a private home. She kept it there for months. Because the tracking system had failed during the transition, nobody immediately noticed the discrepancy. It was not until an independent audit of the state property collection that the gap appeared. The brooch was not where it was supposed to be. The records showed no authorized transfer, no signed paperwork, no legitimate chain of custody, just an absence where a state treasure should have been. When the audit trail was followed, it led to a private residence. Under British civil law, the situation was straightforward. Unauthorized possession of public property. Not a gray area, not a family misunderstanding, a legal violation. Camilla understood immediately what this meant. Her sister was not facing a quiet palace conversation. She was facing potential high court litigation as a private citizen in unauthorized possession of a state artifact. The legal exposure was real and serious. What Camilla did next is where the story shifts from a property dispute into something considerably more significant. King Charles was in a period of medical recovery, resting, not at full operational capacity in the way that a working monarch normally is. Sources say Camilla accessed his private quarters and had documents drawn up under his official authority. A protective directive stating that the king, by his personal sovereign authority, was gifting the brooch to her sister. The legal logic behind this was not unsophisticated. If the king himself had authorized the transfer, the entire situation transformed. What had been unauthorized possession became a legitimate royal gift. The investigation would have no basis to proceed. Police inquiries, search warrants, court orders, all of it would have become legally impossible under the shield of sovereign authority. The directive carried the king's seal. It was designed to be received as final. In the traditional palace culture where orders from the monarch are not easily challenged, especially during a sensitive period when nobody wants to create additional difficulty around a convalescing king, it was calculated to work. It did not work. Anne said no. Princess Anne, in her capacity as guardian of the Royal Collection Trust and the most senior official figure with direct oversight of the royal artifacts, received the directive. She looked at it and she refused to accept it. Her position was precise and unambiguous. The Sapphire Jubilee brooch had never been classified as personal property. No individual, regardless of their proximity to the throne, regardless of what documents were produced, regardless of who had signed them, had the legal authority to reclassify a state diplomatic gift as a private possession available for personal gifting. Anne did not look for a middle ground. She did not suggest a quiet compromise. She compiled the full evidentiary record, the inventory documents, the provenance papers, the audit trail, the evidence of removal and unauthorized possession possession and took it directly to Kensington Palace, to William. What William decided. William's response tells you something important about the kind of institution he is building. The traditional response to a situation like this, a family member of the Queen Consort caught with improperly held state property, a king's seal already on a covering document, would have been to manage it internally. Quiet conversations, discreet pressure. The peace returned without formal process, the whole matter sealed behind palace walls. That is how these things had been handled before. William looked at the evidence Anne had compiled and treated it as what it actually was. A legal matter. Someone had removed state property without authorization. The attempt to use the king's authority while he was vulnerable to cover that removal was itself a serious breach. Neither the family connection nor the institutional pressure to avoid scandal changed what had happened or what the appropriate response was. He made his position clear to his legal team. The rule of law applied. It applied to everyone. It applied regardless of who they were connected to or how uncomfortable enforcement would be for people within the family structure. He then did something that closed off any future attempt to repeat the pattern. William transferred Queen Elizabeth's remaining collection, the most significant historical artifacts, the state pieces, the items carrying the weight of the institution's history, into a newly established independent structure, the Royal Heritage Trust. This was not a palace department subject to royal direction. It was a public trust with its own governance, legally bound to the direct line of succession. No reigning monarch, no queen consort, no senior family member could issue directives that would affect its assets or override its protections. Once the Royal Heritage Trust was formally established on June 10, 2026, every prior protective directive that had been issued, including the document drawn up under Charles's name, became legally invalid. The shield that had been constructed around Camilla's sister simply ceased to exist. The High Court enforcement moved quickly. A task force arrived at the private residence. The Sapphire Jubilee brooch was located, documented, and recovered. The operation was authorized by the courts, not by palace protocol. It proceeded as any civil enforcement action would proceed, without negotiation, without a last-minute arrangement, without the traditional palace machinery intervening to soften the outcome. The speed of it was notable. From the moment William established the new framework to the moment enforcement was executed, there was no extended window for further legal maneuvering or institutional pressure. Kensington Palace said nothing publicly after the recovery. No statement, no explanation, no attempt to contextualize or manage the narrative. The silence was deliberate. The action had spoken. The brooch was back where it legally belonged. Explaining further would only extend the story and invite more questions. So the palace stayed quiet and let the outcome stand on its own. There was no negotiated settlement, no compromise reached in the final hours. The legal process simply proceeded to its conclusion. Then Catherine wore it. At an official state engagement, without announcement, without explanation, pinned to her ceremonial attire as though the choice required no commentary. It did not require commentary. The statement it made was complete without one. The brooch had been recovered from an unauthorized private holding. It was now documented, secured within the Royal Heritage Trust, and in the possession of the person who represents the institution's future. That sequence of events, told entirely through a piece of jewelry worn at a public engagement, communicated everything that needed to be communicated. Who the state gifts belong to, who has access to the symbols of the institution, where the monarchy's significant pieces are going as power moves toward the next generation. Catherine wore it like it was the most natural thing in the world, because legally and institutionally it was. Step back from the individual details, the brooch, the directive, the audit, the raid, and look at the shape of what actually happened. A private individual removed a state artifact and held it without authorization. An attempt was made to use a recovering king's authority to legitimize that removal retroactively. The senior royal with oversight of the collection refused to accept that legitimization. The heir to the throne received the evidence, treated it as a legal matter rather than a family matter, established an independent trust that removed the possibility of future manipulation, and allowed the legal process to proceed without interference. For most of the monarchy's modern history, this situation would have been resolved differently. The connection to the queen consort, the king's seal on a covering document, the institutional preference for handling things quietly, all of it would have created pressure to find a way to make the problem disappear without formal process. That pressure existed here too. William looked at it and chose something different. Not because he was trying to make a statement about Camilla personally, but because the alternative, using family connection and institutional machinery to shield someone from legal consequences, was precisely the kind of thing that erodes public trust in an institution that depends on public trust to exist. The monarchy survives because people believe it operates with some form of integrity. Not perfect integrity, not without complexity, but integrity that is real enough to withstand scrutiny. The brooch was returned, the law was applied, the trust was established, and Catherine wore it in public. That is what the new standard looks like. So, what's your read on this? Was William right to treat this as a strictly legal matter rather than a family situation to be managed internally? Or do you think there was a way to handle it that didn't require this level of public exposure? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This story says as much about where the monarchy is heading as any anything that's happened in years, and I want to know how you're reading it. Subscribe if you're new here. The implications of what William established with the Royal Heritage Trust are still unfolding, and you'll want the full picture as this continues.